Now here's your host, Jason Voorhees and Aaron Savage.
Ooh, yeah!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports and Metal Podcast. We are your hosts. I haven't been here in a couple weeks. 2 weeks ago, I had some technical difficulties. Last week, I was on vacation, but I'm back. I'm Aaron Savage. With me, as always, my partner in crime, Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Jason Voorhees. What's up, Jay?
What's up, man? I'm juiced up. Phillies
Me
just
too,
won.
brother. I'm pumped. Bro, I'm pumped. I'm coming off the high from the return of live music in my life. Obviously, you and I attended the Loungefly show, Stone Temple Pilots cover band, which was phenomenal a few weeks back. But last Saturday, I got to see my all-time favorite band, who I've seen many times over the years. But, you know, it's never too many times to see them. My all-time favorite band, and it was great to see them in my return to seeing, like, a big concert, you know, a 30,000, venue, crowded house, no mask. It felt like Corona never happened. But we were at my son and I were at the Guns N' Roses concert in Hershey, Pennsylvania last Saturday. And, bro, after, like, almost 2 years, I'm exaggerating, a year and a half almost of lockdown as far as, not really being able to do much, it was awesome to be stuffed amongst 30,000 people. I know a lot of people are pissed off when they hear about that, but I'm vaccinated. But you know what? I'm not here to make a political statement, except to say that I am totally for opening up. I'm glad. I mean, for people's mental health, it's important. It was just so important. It was a great experience to take Gavin, my son, to his first concert, and let alone it being my favorite band, Guns N' Roses, and also just to see such a big epic show as your first show, Guns N' Roses. I mean, we were pretty close to the stage. It was awesome, brother. So I'm pumped for that. I mean, I can't say enough about it. It was just great.
What did the set list look like?
I'm sure you've seen it on, internet. I mean, it was definitely a cutback set list from, the Not in This Lifetime tour when they were doing 3.5 hour shows. I mean, they played still 2.5 hours, which is, I mean, for any other band, you go to see almost any band headlining, you see a 90-minute set. So, I mean, Guns N' Roses is still putting a 2.5 hour set together. But, I mean, just for them, as far as their recent history, I mean, they were doing 3.5 hour sets. But, I mean, I'm not sure Hershey may have had a curfew, but I saw the Fenway show the other night. It was a comparable set. They added one song to the Fenway show they did 2 nights ago over the Hershey show. One extra song. It was Absurd, a new Guns N' Roses song, which is actually a reworking of a Chinese Democracy era song called Silkworms that wasn't on Chinese Democracy. They reworked it. Obviously, now that Slash and Duff are in the band, it's called Absurd. They played that at Fenway. But yeah, it was like I said, it was 2.5 hours. They still played Civil War, Estranged, obviously all the ones you expect. You open It's So Easy, then you get Mr. Brownstone #2, you close with Paradise City, you got Night Train. I mean, it was unbelievable. When we saw them back in 2016, that was insane. I mean, you got Coma, My Michelle. I mean, when they did November Rain at that time, then they went into the whole Layla coda, dun, 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 dun. So that was cut out. But I mean, dude, I'm not complaining, bro. It was the return of live music. Wolfgang Van Halen opened the show with his band Mammoth WVH. Obviously, the band's named after the original name of Van Halen, which was Mammoth. So, I mean, Wolfgang was firing on all cylinders. The kid is so talented. He was amazing. He put on about an hour set. His voice was top notch. I mean, it was just an all-around great show, bro. I mean, Axl obviously doesn't have the pipes he once did. I mean, in the higher registers, he doesn't have that screech. But he hasn't had that for years now. It's almost like he's in that falsetto all the time. But dude, I'm not complaining, bro. Just to be able to, it's mind-boggling, even to see Guns N' Roses. I know they've been back together with Slash and Duff going on 5-6 years now, but it still boggles the mind, and it still makes you always think, man, what if you can get Izzy and Steven back in there? I mean, when you go back to when Guns N' Roses first hit the scene, if you would have said back in 1987 that all 5 of the original members that played on Appetite for Destruction would still be alive in 2021, if you bet money on that, everybody in the world would have bet against you. You'd be a billionaire, because nobody thought that with all the issues they had, the drinking, the drugs. I mean, everything that was going on with that band back then. So, I mean, it's a blessing to be able to see these guys, even without Izzy and Steven. But, I mean, if they ever were back, it'd be even better. But not complaining, bro. It was unbelievable. It was a great experience for Gavin.
I
We're talking about it. What's that, Jay?
Yeah, I don't know. There's some feedback. That's what I wanted to talk about. Like the fact that your son, his very first concert in his lifetime was Guns N' Roses. I mean, my first concert was Megadeth, I believe. And like, they're not even on the same stratosphere as Guns N' Roses. I mean, to be able to see Guns N' Roses your first concert to me is
I mean, it's like seeing the Stones.
Yeah.
It's like seeing the Rolling Stones for your first concert to me. I mean, and as far as there you go,
Mr. Phil
up,
in the
Phil,
house.
checking in. And thank you again, Phil, for filling in for me last week. It was a great show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I meant to say that on the opening. Phil Stifle filled in graciously for me last week. Thanks again. And obviously, he filled in while I was in Hershey to see Guns. So
that was an awesome experience. And even Phil said he would have rather been with you at the show than with me on my show. So
I just happened to book, Hershey, a while back with the family, and I just forgot Guns was playing that weekend, so we got the tickets. Actually, as we're speaking, right here in my home state of New Jersey, Guns is doing a show right now at MetLife Stadium. Everybody was like, when I was promoting the show tonight, was like, "Aren't you at Guns N' Roses?" I would love to be, but we had the show. I was just in Hershey the other day. I'm not loaded after Hershey Park. We had the fair in my town the prior week. I spent a fortune at the fair with the kids. Then Guns N' Roses and all of that came with that. With my son, I've spent a fortune lately, and it's a weeknight. I've work tomorrow, but I would love to be there.
We know the truth.
Oh, actually, it's not true. When I originally booked the trip, I wasn't even paying attention to the tour dates. It was just one of those great. It was like it was meant to be. Guns N' Roses is my favorite band. It was meant to be. I booked the trip. I happened to be there. There I am. And Phil, I don't think I know I told Jay off the air, but one of the coolest things about it was we got to Hershey on Thursday. The gun show was Saturday. So we get to Hershey Thursday. We did Chocolate World for the day. For anybody who's ever been to Hershey, they have the main Hershey Park, but there's a separate little park or building called Chocolate World where they have like the candy making ride and the stores and some experiences like make your own chocolate bar, this and that. We did that, and then we checked into the Hershey Lodge where we were staying. And then there's a new restaurant there called the Chocolatier. So we figured let's take the shuttle over to see if we can get dinner at the Chocolatier, unbeknownst that there'd be like a 9-hour wait. So that didn't work out. But we go over there, and we're walking. Chocolatier's right across from where Hershey Stadium is. So we're walking. I hear music, and I don't know, obviously, who's at Hershey Stadium every night. I knew the Guns was playing Saturday. Thursday, for all I know, might have been another show. I didn't know. So I'm walking up. I hear music in the background. I say to my son, Gavin, I said, "Oh, there must be a show tonight." So we're walking closer. But it was – no, you know what? It would have been where like an opening act was. It probably was about 7 o'clock. So like unbeknownst, it could have been like an opening act for another show.
Yeah, because
that's my thought. What's that?
Yeah, because you sent me a text message.
Yeah. So anyway, going on, we're walking up, and I'm hearing music. I'm like, Gavin, I think there might be a show going on tonight. And then as we get closer, I hear and obviously that's Rocket Queen. So I'm like, Gavin, it's fucking Guns N' Roses. They're rehearsing. So we were like listening to Guns rehearse. It was awesome. And then we went to Hershey Park Friday, and again they were rehearsing, and they actually played "Used to Love Her" with Duff singing. They did Paradise City in the rehearsal with just a gang, chorus vocal, "Take me down to the paradise." So we heard that, and we actually heard them rehearse from Chinese Democracy, "There Was a Time." Coincidentally, "There Was a Time" and "Used to Love Her" weren't in the set the night of the show, but they were rehearsing those. So we got some bonus songs. I'm standing there waiting on a line for the ride, The Claw, in Hershey Park. My daughter wanted to go on, and I'm hearing freaking Guns N' Roses play "There Was a Time" in rehearsal. And the crazy part is 90% of the people had no idea what they were listening to, between younger people or people had no idea Guns N' Roses was there. And it was just instrumental, so there was no vocals in some of this. I'm like worshiping at the altar of Guns N' Roses. No one else knows what the hell's going on.
Blown away.
What's that?
Blown away.
Absolutely. So that was just awesome. But as we're talking about the return of live music, just as fast, we might be talking about the end of it. Oh, I mean, as we're speaking, I saw Eddie Trunk today tweeted. He didn't name the band, but he said he was speaking to a classic rock band that's about to announce cancellations and postponements due to this Delta virus, the Delta variant of the coronavirus. and everything that's going with that. New York City just announced a mask mandate for any indoor event, including dining. And the only way to not wear a mask indoors is to actually provide proof of vaccination. So I'm not going to get into this. Don't want to do it. But I will say this. The return of live music could end just as fast as it started. So I'm even more grateful that I got to see Guns in this little hiatus of normalcy before everything goes back to the way it was, which it looks like is about to happen. But anyway, Jay, why don't we move on? Obviously, the name of the show is Dead Horse. And it seems like we're beating a dead horse every week. Notice the double entendre there. Dead Horse is a Guns N' Roses song. No, not NL East. Go back. I'm not there yet, Jay. You don't know where I'm going. So it seems like we're beating a dead horse week after week with having to, unfortunately, announce another passing in the world of sports and music. I know you were going to say beating the dead horse of these mediocre teams in the NL East, but we'll get to that.
I was getting ahead of myself there.
You get ahead of yourself. Nah, you did. We're beating dead horses on a few things here, but one of them is the unfortunate thing that we have to do every week is this in memoriam section of the show. Like week after week, somebody in the world of sports and music is passing away. Just today, we lost Houston Astros legendary pitcher J.R. Richard. Very under the radar guy, Jay. I know you posted some stats. I'll let you get to the numbers. But before you do, I just wanted to, point out this guy was dominant. He was a dominant pitcher. He was almost like the Dwight Gooden of his era. The way Dwight Gooden came out and just dominated the league. Like Doc in 85, 24-4, 1.54 ERA. Set the rookie record for strikeouts in 84 and almost matched it in 85. I mean, lights out. J.R. Richard was that guy. I mean, the guy, Dave Winfield tweeted today. He said that the toughest pitcher he ever faced that had the best stuff he's ever seen was J.R. Richard. And I saw Winfield also joke that that's why he stayed friends with him forever. But so he didn't have to be intimidated by him. But tragic death. J.R. Richard's career was tragically cut short by a stroke in 1980. He was warming up before a game in the Astrodome on the side playing catch, had a stroke. Now, everybody always just talks about the positives when somebody dies. And I'm not trying to throw mud on a guy that just passed because J.R. Richard's an ultimate talent. But it's worth saying, I mean, if we're talking about a guy's life, we should hit on all things. J.R. Richard was one of the guys implicated in like the cocaine scandal in the late 70s, early 80s in MLB. His former teammate, who was it? I'm just looking it up because I'm actually drawing a blank here. Oh, Enos Cable, his former teammate, or Enos Cabell. I don't even remember how to pronounce that. He was a teammate of J.R. Richard on the Astros, and he said that they both used cocaine regularly during the 1980 season, right up to the time that Richard suffered a career-ending stroke. So I've always heard the stories about J.R. Richard's cocaine use. It may have led to the stroke. But again, I mean, you draw the comparisons to the young Dwight Gooden and how his career tragically took turns, and we all know the story. So again, I'm not trying to throw mud on the guy, but it's part of his history. It's unfortunate the way his career was cut short. And I'm certain that J.R. Richard would have been one of the all-time greatest pitchers. Why don't you throw some of the numbers at us that you had?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was my point. When you first tweeted it to me this afternoon, first thing that came to my mind was the first word that came to my mind was dominant. And you pretty much hit it on the head. If there's any guy that he reminded me of, it was Dwight Gooden. The tall kind of. He was 6'8", 220 pounds. So he was like tall, but he wasn't like he wasn't heavy set. He was tall and kind of lanky.
Yeah.
And
back then, yeah.
The thing that really blows my mind is the 3-year stretch that he had before he had the stroke. So let's see. So let's go to his breakout season, which was in 1976. He went 20-15 that year. That was kind of the year that he burst onto the scene after having a couple years of 4 ERAs and maybe 10-win season.
That's true. Doc kind of came out swinging as a rookie. JR
was more of a correct. He was more of a slow build up, but he was kind of going into his prime. And this is what makes it fascinating looking at this guy, his sample size, because in 76, he went 20-15. Then at 77, he went 18-12 with an under 3 ERA. and he had like 212 strikeouts, which was still a lot. I mean, 212 strikeouts.
Dude, Jay, I have to cut in there. Of course it was a lot. That was an era where guys didn't strike out. That's like 350 today.
Well, no, I'm talking about pitchers.
No, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but pitchers don't get 300 strikeouts now a lot. Not
only because they don't throw enough innings.
I got you. But my point is
his 212 strikeouts in today's game is like 350.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I guess the point I'm making is then when you saw his 78 season, when he went 18-11 with a 3.11 ERA in 275 innings pitched, and he had 303 strikeouts, which was 9.9 strikeouts per 9 innings. And he had 16 complete games. So this was a monster season for this guy. Now, obviously, he didn't win. I think he was third in the MVP voting, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that. It was definitely third in the Cy Young. But then 1979, he matched that year with an 18-13 record. His ERA dropped to 2.71. He threw 293 innings and he had 313 strikeouts with 19 complete games. So he basically took what he did in 78 and pretty much, amassed those numbers. And then you come to 1980, which is the year that he had the stroke. Mm-hmm. But before he had that stroke, he was 10-4 with a 1.90 ERA and 113 innings pitched with a 2.73 in 68 innings, and he had 73. He had 119 strikeouts.
Yep.
And 4 complete games. So you're talking, if he didn't have the stroke that year, it's possible that he could have even bettered the numbers from 79. So my point was he was on an upward track. And
let me dive into that really quick. Let me dive into those numbers quick. You're talking a guy who in these seasons, every one of these seasons averaged more than a strikeout per inning. Jay, put that into perspective. That was at a time where hitters didn't strike out. You know what I'm saying? His numbers fit into today's game as far as the strikeout totals go. In an era where everybody strikes out. You now if a guy strikes out, a hitter, strikes out 200 times, you don't bat an eye at it. Back then, maybe you had one hitter on your club that had struck out 100 times. Maybe. And that was your power hitter. And again, maybe. 100 strikeouts was you don't want to get there, Now it's like everybody's swinging for the fences. It's the strikeout doesn't have the negative connotation that it did then for a hitter. So when you look at J.R. Richards, what's up, Drunk on Broad checking in? When you look at J.R. Richards' stats at that time, when he was negative 20. We're a little older. I was 3, but still we're a little older. But when you look at those numbers at that time period, to strike out almost 10 hitters per 9 innings, that's insane, dude. It's not just about the totals. It's about the averages. No, it's about the averages in the era. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you look at like Garrett Cole, when he struck out 300 guys, he's barely cracking 200 innings. And he's pitching in an era where everybody strikes out. So when you take, what would J.R. Richards do in today's game is my point.
Well,
would he strike out 400 guys?
Well, you hit it on the head. And I think the thing is that he, I guess the point I'm making is, had this guy not had a stroke, we'd probably be talking about him in the top 5 pitchers of all time.
Top 10, maybe. Yeah, sure. I'm with you, bro.
This guy was absolute dominant. And Dave Winfield is not the only guy that checked in today. I saw about probably 50 hitters of that time period checking in, throughout social media. Joe Morgan being one. And Joe Morgan was a great hitter. Not that Dave Winfield wasn't, but my point is Joe Morgan was an average guy. And Joe Morgan said he was definitely the toughest pitcher that he ever faced. And Joe Morgan faced Bob Gibson, if I'm not mistaken. So what does that tell you?
Yeah. Just really quick, not to change the subject, I just got an alert. Duff McKagan started a live video. You know what that means? Guns N' Roses is about to hit the stage at MetLife Stadium.
Yeah, well, he did
Rock
that.
And roll, baby.
He did that at your
show.
show.
Getting some shows in before it gets shut down. What's that?
Well, Duff did that at your show, and I actually thought I was actually excited because I thought, maybe I'll get to see Aaron in the crowd, but you weren't close enough. But,
Duff's awesome. But yeah, J.R. Richard, an amazing talent, but it did bring me back to that. Even Keith Hernandez was like implicated in that cocaine stuff. I mean, that was like a big thing. Dave Parker was implicated. I mean, there was like a trial, in Congress.
Well,
I'm not going to get into all of that, but it did bring me back to that. I mean, you always heard the jokes. I mean, Keith was like clean as a whistle as a Met. At least we thought so. But it was the other guys who were like doing the. I shouldn't say Keith was clean as a whistle. I'm sure he was partying his ass off on the '86 Mets. But I mean, I think the other stuff was kind of behind him. But he did kind of, his reputation at that time, he did kind of fit right in with the reputation of the Mets, with the cocaine and the partying and stuff, because he was implicated back when he was with the Cardinals with that.
Well, you bring up a good point. The fact that, he may have actually saved his life if he was doing cocaine, because the fact that he had the stroke and then obviously had to, worry about his health. And that was in 1980.
Yeah.
But my point is he lived a long life now. So it's very possible that maybe he was going down the wrong road. Who knows? The point I'm making is the guy obviously is under the radar when we talk about all-time greats. And, thank God that, at least we did get to see some of his magical seasons, and rest in peace.
Yeah. Before we move on, though, it is a tragic story. I'm actually reading an article right now from the Los Angeles Times, June 29th, 1987. Let me just get into this. So this is 7 years after the stroke. On days when he doesn't go fishing, he lounges a lot. His former wife, Carolyn, describes him as listless, out of it, lacking in ambition and motivation. Richard doesn't agree. I know I lay here too much, he said. I look at my share of TV. He eats his share too. His weight, about 225 when he played, peaked at about 302 pounds a few months ago. He said, and he's still carrying about 50 extra pounds on his 6'8" frame. A delivery man told him a few months ago that ESPN had reported his weight to be about 400 pounds.
Oh.
So, I mean, he did go through some hard times. It is a tragic story, but he made it 71 years, and he was a great talent. Like I said, I'm not trying to dump on the guy, but I just want to be transparent when we're talking about people. And it's not like a knock on him. None of us are perfect, but it's part of his story, So rest in peace, J.R. Richard. So let's continue to beat that dead horse, Jay. And at least it does seem like we're beating a dead horse with our teams. You're a Phillies fan. I'm a Mets fan. And it's like the same fucking story over and over with these teams. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, this is almost like the 73 season where the Mets won the division, and I think they were a game over 500. We might see that this year in this division.
What is the definition of insanity? The same thing
over and over again, expecting a different result.
That reminds me of the Phillies and the Mets, and more importantly, the NL East. Because if you really look at every single team in this division, obviously the Nationals are just a couple years away, removed from winning a World Series. However, look at the Nationals team now compared to that team. Like, they basically sold it off. Now, here's an interesting point that I wanted to bring up to this subject, looking at the Nationals' perspective. I'm starting to believe that some of these teams actually took a piece of advice from what not to do from that 2008 Phillies team that won the World Series. Because if you remember correctly, that team kind of held on to its star players a little bit too long. And now look at the fact that it took them so long to rebuild, and they still haven't rebuilt. Now, that's another story for another day, and I can go on a rant. But
so you're referring to the Nationals, gutting the team.
They got the team, right away, because they figured, we won a World Series, and now we're going to kind of reboot. But I know you have a rant that you wanted to kind of get into, and I'm going to let you take the floor first before I do mine, because social media already knows me. I'm Mr. Miserable, and I'm Mr. Negative about the Phillies. So
I don't know if it's necessarily a rant. It's just it might become one. But, I mean, when we're talking about this Mets team and we're talking about the NL East, I mean, the Mets, every team in the National League East has given the Mets every opportunity to run away with this division. And yet, here the Mets sit now with a lead that has dwindled to 1.5 games above your Phillies. The Mets have been in first place since
actually half the game.
Phillies came back today?
Phillies came back.
Did they really get out of it? I saw they were losing 5-2.
Yeah, that's what I said at the beginning of the show when I said I'm psyched. The Phillies.
Oh, yeah. Duh. I was, you know what? Yeah, they won 9-5. I'm sorry. I got so wrapped up in the Guns N' Roses. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's a half game. So we're going to the game tomorrow night, Jay. This is huge. This is a huge series. The Phillies could end up in first place by the time we leave that stadium tomorrow night. I hope not. But yeah, so I mean, this is my point. It's a half game lead. The Mets have been in first place something like 90 straight days, like since mid-May or whatever. And now here they are about to not be. And they have been given every opportunity to run away. Like I said, even with the Phillies win today, they're only 55-53. The Mets peaked at 8 games over 500 this year. They're now down to 5 games over 500 after today's loss. So it's kind of been a consistent inconsistency, which I saw you tweeted today, that term. I like it. A consistent inconsistency.
Because it's the model of that.
Yeah, it is. But that's the story of the Mets even this year. I mean, here's my thing. Do I think and I don't say this with bias. Do I think the Mets have the most talented team in the division? I really do. But it's like, but then you look at like what's going on. Like you brought in Francisco Lindor. Now, nobody would question that trade, despite the year that Lindor has had. We all would make that trade every day and twice on Sunday. Guy's a superstar talent in his prime. But you're talking about a guy who's hitting 220 and has now been out almost a month. And he's not going to be back until September. So right off the bat, you take a big hit there. Now, you take Michael Conforto. He's in his walk year. Talk about being consistently inconsistent. Michael Conforto came up with great fanfare in 2015 when the Mets made their World Series run. Came up, was a big hitter, had some big hits in the postseason, big home runs, looked like a star in the making. And all he has done since is battle injuries and inconsistency and strikeouts. I mean, even take like just last year to this year, it's typical of his career. He shows signs of like, oh, he's finally going to break into superstardom, and then he takes 10 steps backwards. Last year in the 60-game season, he hit like 320, had like 40 RBI, like something like 15, 20 bombs, and was like an MVP candidate. And you're like, wow, he's finally turning the corner. And you knew he was coming into a walk year this year. You expected big things. So that was a big reason you expected the Mets to really have a great offense. Lindor, Conforto was supposed to be a big part of that. Conforto's missed a lot of time, and he's hitting like 202, bro. And I think he's got 20 RBI. I'll look really quick. Hold on.
What's going on, Mike?
What's going on, Mike? How are you? Yeah, so he's got 24 RBI and 6 home runs, dude. In 231 at bats, and after today, he's down to 199, his batting average. I mean, so it's just very, very disappointing. And then you get to the pitching. I think the Mets have the best pitching in the division, although it's definitely taken a hit with DeGrom being out. But dude, I don't know what's going on. The Mets have given up 100 runs since the All-Star break. Terrible. But I have to think it has a lot to do with Luis Rojas just not letting starters pitch. Like Cookie Carrasco was out most of the season. He's made 2 starts. He just came back. Cookie Carrasco was a big part of the Lindor trade. He's a very talented pitcher, and he's been a model of consistency, not really injured throughout his career. Coincidentally, comes to the Mets, gets a hamstring injury. Okay, I get it. You want to weed him back in, but he did have some rehab starts. If you're only going to let this guy pitch 4 1/3 innings, why'd you even activate him? Because what happens is you got Rich Hill. You only let him throw 5 innings. They picked him up too before the trade deadline. But you're only letting him throw 5 innings. Today he had 5 shutout innings. They just don't want to let anybody go through the lineup for a third time. Now, I get it. Oh, analytics tells us pitchers go through a lineup a third time, their numbers go downhill, hitters start hitting off them. Okay, that doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. Take a guy out when you see he's getting in some trouble. Don't just take him out because you think he's going to, because he's facing the lineup for the third time, because we see it every day. Bullpens come in and give up the runs. So I don't understand that logic. We've been on this on other shows, but I think it has a lot to do with where the Mets are. Even when you go back to when DeGrom was healthy, how many times did you take, even before there was any inclination? I know you could say, oh, after you had the few injuries that he had, you were being careful with him. I get it. But even before that, when there was no inclination of an injury, and even in past seasons, when you're just letting this guy pitch 7 shutout innings and throw 68 pitches, and you take him out because it's 1-0 and he threw 7, but he only had 68 pitches. And how many games did you lose? That happens every year. I think it has a lot to do with where the Mets are and why they've let these teams get back into the race. Because not only does it cost you the games where you take the starting pitcher out that's rolling, and your offense isn't clicking on all cylinders, so it's a very close game. Not only does it affect you in those games, and the bullpen comes in and gives up a few runs, you lose those games, but then it affects you in other games where your bullpen's short and you have like a starting pitcher get injured. And now your bullpen's short and you're just throwing slop out there. Like the Mets picked up former Philly Jared Eichhoff this season. They cut this guy 3 different times and re-signed him 3 different times because they had no fresh arms. And the last start, he gave up 10 runs in like 2 innings. So with the Mets, it's beating a dead horse. It's seeing the same thing every day, like you said, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. It's a definition of insanity. Obviously, you've had underachievers on the team, but it's also just like giving games away, giving them away. And, as a Phillies fan, I know I hear you bitch all the time. So why don't you tell me?
Well, I'm actually going to come out on my show and say I was a little bit wrong. And I know sometimes it takes a lot to do that, but you know me, I'm a very humble person. So I've kind of been very vocal on my takes, especially when it comes to the Phillies, on Twitter and social media. And I've been super, super critical of Bryce Harper. Now, let me just preface this by saying I believe that I have a right to be critical of the guy. He's paid $300-some million a year. I mean, for his contract is a $300 million contract. He's making $26 million a year. He's the Phillies' highest paid player. So, of course, as a fan, I expect him to be the best player. Now, with that being said, I think part of the problem with me is that when he did sign that contract, I had a inflated view of what Bryce Harper actually is as a player. And also, I had a higher expectation of what I thought he was going to bring to the table as far as stats. Now, on paper right now, he's actually having a very good season.
He's having a solid year. His best year.
He's actually having one of his best years if you look at it. If you look at the numbers that, the analytics people look at, the OPS, very high OPS. He's batting 3. I think at today's game,
batting average won't be analytic, but yes, I like his batting average this year.
Well, my point is
the analytics guys frown on batting average.
Well, I got you,
but I get your point.
OPS, but here's here's where a lot of times I get in arguments with people, and I know you're like me. I'm an old school guy. I always thought that the RBI was pretty important. If you're not knocking in runs and your team isn't in scoring runs and winning, then what good are you actually doing? That was just my opinion. Now, we could sit here and argue, and trust me, I got raked under the coals on that tweet that I put out. So I'm going to admit that maybe I have too high of expectations of this guy, and I'll admit I'm actually pretty pleasantly surprised that he's hitting 300 and, he's having a good year. That being said, the Phillies are still mediocre. So Bryce Harper is not the whole team. The problem with the Phillies is that for so long during this rebuild, they've tried to use Band-Aids and they've tried to just sign free agents to win. But if you really look at this league, the way it's built now, that's not how you win. Because if you really look at it, look at the Mets. Yeah, the Mets have had a couple good free agents and they made a trade here and there, but most of their good players have come up through the system. And that's the problem I have with the Phillies. The Phillies have no system, and the guys that they do have that come up in their system, they've ruined. Guys like Rhys Hoskins, Alec Boehm. I mean, these are guys that, really should be playing better than they are. But for whatever reason, I don't know if they were coached poorly. Now, I know the Phillies have changed, coaches down in the ranks of their minor league system, and they've changed minor league, whoever runs the minor league, the director of personnel, whatever they call that. I know they changed that. But my point is that how long do I have to wait? I mean, and that's why I wanted this team to sell. So I was a little annoyed because I thought that the best way to rebuild your team when you're in this point of being mediocre, because let's face it, I really don't think even if the Mets, Phillies, or whoever wins the NL East, I don't think whoever wins the NL East has a shot in hell at going to the World Series. Now, maybe I'm wrong.
May I come in?
Yeah. Okay.
May I? Okay, because you're hitting on a few points as far as both of our teams go. You kind of brought me around full circle here. First of all, I know what you're saying about the Mets have had a lot of homegrown players in recent years, and they have. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good for me because I love watching homegrown guys, so I get it. But it's also kind of a bad thing because it's almost also an indictment of the Wilpon ownership after the Madoff scandal when they were a New York baseball team that wasn't spending like a New York baseball team and having to live in the shadow of the Yankees that were spending tons of money. So as a Mets fan, maybe from speaking for the fan base, I think a lot of Mets fans would disagree with you. They would have liked to have seen some of the big splashes that weren't necessarily part of the Mets' plans in recent years. That has a lot to do with why they had so many homegrown guys. That being said, I did like watching the homegrown guys. And then to your other point, as far as the Phillies being sellers, that's where I disagree with you. I think with this division being as mediocre as it is, think about it. When the deadline hit just a couple days ago, the Phillies were 4 games out. Now, maybe that looked more daunting 4 or 5 days ago, but look how fast they just made it up. Now they're a half game out. The Mets haven't shown that they can run away with this division. Now, I will say this, with the Phillies' record being what it is, if the Mets had opened up a 10-11 game lead, 100% sell. But they didn't. The Mets left it wide open. So that being said, when you have Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola at the top of your rotation, and I know we're going to get into Aaron Nola hasn't had his best year, he's still a very good pitcher. He's still a guy that on any given night can spin a 3-hit shutout. And Zach Wheeler has become one of the top pitchers in the league. To me, you go into a playoff series, Zach Wheeler's got to be your game 1 starter. But that being said, Phillies have a pretty good 1-2 punch. So if the Phillies or Mets with their rotation as well, with or without DeGrom, ideally with DeGrom and then Stroman and Carrasco, whatever, these teams have the pitching in a short series that anything can happen. So like I said, the Mets left it wide open. If you're the Phillies, why would you sell? I'd be buyers because once you get in this, dude, it's not like the old days where it was like you get into the playoffs, there's an LCS and a World Series. And prior to that, there wasn't even that. It was just the American League winner versus the National League winner, World Series, 7-game series. Now it's not like that. You got wild card games, 1-game playoffs. Dude, any team can beat any team on any given night. That's baseball. That's why, as a traditionalist, a lot of people would be like, oh, I don't like the way the playoffs are because it's not fair that a team should be eliminated in 1 game. We can get into that whole argument. I actually like it because it made winning the division important again. I didn't like it where you could win a division or choose to not win it just to be the wild card to choose your matchup in the playoffs. Teams started tanking intentionally, not winning the division if they knew they were going to get in the playoffs anyway, because they knew that they could match up with a team that they would beat. So with the new playoff system, if you don't win the division where you have to play these like 1-game playoffs and whatnot, I like it because it puts value back in winning the division. The point being is if you get to the playoffs, anything can happen. So why would you sell if you're the Phillies? And then we go to the Mets. What are the Mets doing? You're in first place in a division that we all know is wide open. You can win this division. And I have already said I believe the Mets have the most talent in the division. You need a pitcher. Why didn't you make it happen? Why didn't you do whatever it took? I wanted Barrios. I know the asking price was high, but I just think the Mets could have made it work. I think it's whether or not that's true, the end result of not getting a big pitcher at the deadline. Steve Cohen is the richest owner in sports, and I expect big things from him. So I'm not going to personally judge him off this one trade deadline for what I expect the future to be for him. But in a lot of fans' eyes, it can paint the picture of like, oh, this is the Wilpons all over again. Steve Cohen, we expected big things. And I think for the Mets to just go out and make a trade for the sake of making a trade when they didn't get that big fish and bringing in Javier Baez, who is a superstar in his own right, or at least a big talent. I wouldn't call him a superstar. He has the talent to be a superstar, but he's not. And that's where I'm going. I don't like that trade. I think the Mets ended up making a trade for the sake of making a trade when they brought Baez in. You have Lindor, so you don't need another shortstop. I know Lindor's hurt, but he is coming back. And you have other guys that can put up big numbers at these other positions. You have J.D. Davis, Jeff McNeil, and guess what? I know talent-wise, Luis Guillorme on the Mets isn't Baez, but he was filling in very admirably for Lindor since Lindor went down. And just today, Javier Baez went 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts and left the tying runs on base in the 9th inning. And guess what? No Met had struck out 5 times in a game since Ryan Thompson in 1993. The point is, Javier Baez had a couple of big seasons in Chicago, but you look at the trend the last couple of years, his strikeouts have gone through the roof. This is a guy that looks like he could strike out 250 times in 600 at bats. I just don't like that on my team. I just don't like it, and I think the Mets didn't need to make that trade. Now, the only positive to it is they gave up Pete Crow Armstrong, who to me is like a fringe prospect. I know he was a pretty big prospect, but he doesn't have a lot of power. He projects as a leadoff hitter, and he doesn't. And in today's game, with guys striking out so much, to me, it just doesn't seem like a big loss. And he's out all year with a shoulder injury, so they gave up a hurt prospect. So in that, they didn't give up much. So I can live with that. But I just think it was a trade for the sake of making a trade, and I just think it was I think the Phillies did better at the deadline. They brought in Kyle Gibson from Texas. I think he was a solid pitcher. I think he would have been a huge acquisition for the New York Mets. And it's not a big name. It's not a sexy name, but it's a guy that the Mets needed, and the Phillies got that guy. He's pitching tomorrow night against Marcus Stroman. We'll be at the game again, like we said. So I think the Mets blew it, and I think that all the more is why when the Mets didn't make that big deal, it just shined a bigger light on the Phillies being buyers, but we'll see who wins this NL East. Time will tell. Before we switch gears, I don't know if you had anything to add, but I just wanted to kind of chime in on the Cubs, talking about the trade deadline. We talked about Javier Baez. Dude, obviously the Nationals blew up their recent World Championship team. They'd already lost Rendon to a big deal when he signed with the Angels. But, I mean, now Scherzer's gone. But, I mean, Scherzer's an aging player. I could see it. But I think the Cubs is a bigger thing, man. I mean, this is a team that waited 100 years to win a World Series, and they had this huge core of Baez and then the biggest star, Chris Bryant, and then the second biggest star, Anthony Rizzo. All these guys in their 20s, the core of that team. And rather than build around those guys, they cut payroll from they were one of the highest payroll teams only 4 or 5 years ago to they've been running their team like the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Cubs, basically just shedding salary. And the Ricketts or whatever, who bought that team in 2009, he's a billionaire. He's a billionaire. What is it, Tom Rickett? I can't remember the guy's name. He's a billionaire. What are the Cubs doing? And I thought about this year, because the Cubs have already kind of tanked it. They've been not a playoff team for 5 years now. So it's not just about this year. Now it led to this and blowing that core up. But where were they the last 5 years after winning the World Series of surrounding that core with talent to be a consistent winner? Think about it. That's my 2 cents. I feel bad for Cubs fans. I do. Chris Bryant was supposed to be the best player in the game, like Mike Trout. He did win an MVP. It was like second year in the league. In 2015 when they was it 2015 when the Mets beat him in the playoffs, or 2016 when they won the World Series? One of those years it was the MVP. I know he's been a little bit of an underachiever, but he's still in his prime, and he was the face of the franchise.
The Cubs, to me, they totally blew it. I don't know I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I don't know what's going on.
I hear you, so go on.
Okay. I don't know what they're doing. I agree. It kind of reminds me a little bit similar to the Phillies of the 08 run, although the Phillies made it a lot further, a lot longer. But it was kind of the same way where the Cubs were kind of built through their young, you know what I mean? You had Jake Arrieta, who. Well,
no, Arrieta, he was like a signing, but yeah, I get it. I'm more talking about the core. I'm talking about the core of
Bryant. Their core, the core kind of reminded me of the Phillies because, remember you had the Phillies, you had Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, Cole Hamels, Jimmy Rollins. So you had all those young guys. Same thing with the Cubs, Javi Baez,
Rizzo,
Bryant. So it was almost like a similar type thing. But you're right; these guys still are kind of. I don't want to say they're over the hill or out of their prime. I mean, Rizzo's kind of getting there, but Bryant still, I could see having a couple good more years. I think the Cubs just got to the point where it was kind of like what I was saying the Phillies should do, where they needed to sell, not because you don't have good players, but because you don't have good players in your farm system. And that's the same thing. The Cubs kind of I don't know what happened to their farm system because they used to have one of the best farm teams in baseball. If you looked at that team, and if you look at their farm system now, it's ranked. I'm not saying it's ranked at the bottom, but it's definitely not in the top.
But, dude, I don't even think it's really so much about that. I think it's an indictment of ownership with the Cubs. I mean, the Cubs are one of the richest teams in the sport. they could have like built a team that surrounded talent around this core. And I think Chris Bryant has a lot more than a few good years left. The guy's 29 years old.
Yeah, but he's been injured.
I know, but he's still 29, dude. And when you talk about Chris Bryant, you're talking about a guy who's like at least what they thought was a generational talent coming out of, when he was brought up. I mean, I heard more about him than I heard of Mike Trout at that time. So I'm just, obviously he hasn't had that kind of career, but he's a guy that is like a superstar talent. Anthony Rizzo is another one. Baez has all the talent in the world. Like I said, the Mets got Baez, and I'm not thrilled with it. But I mean, he was still part of that core, But anyway, that's my 2 cents. I think it's an indictment of the Cubs ownership. I mean, when they won the World Series and they didn't surround that team with talent, and I think they had a core that could have been good for years, and they have all this money. It would, to me, be like the Yankees blowing up the Yankees when they had Jeter, Bernie Williams, Andy Pettitte, Mariano Rivera, Jorge Posada. The Cubs could have been that. Now, I'm a Mets fan, but hold on. I know there's so many things driving me crazy, but we're talking about the Fightins. We were talking about the Phillies. Anyway, let's go Mets. But back to the Cubs. I'm a Mets fan. You talk about the Mets in 15. The Mets didn't have like the core that the Cubs had. The Mets kind of were lightning in a bottle. They were a team that didn't have a lot of offense. Daniel Murphy became like, oh my God, like what a postseason he had. And they got Cespedes at the deadline. He just carried the team. And whereas the Cubs were like an up and coming team, the Mets had the pitching, but pitching's always more of a crapshoot. That was when they had Syndergaard, DeGrom, Matz. So there's no disrespect to what the Mets had, but to me, pitching's more of a crapshoot and it doesn't last as long as an offensive core. The Cubs had an offensive core to build around, where you could have brought in like your Max Scherzers or your Garrett Coles. Where have the Cubs been? What have they been doing?
I agree with you.
Payroll. They've been
shedding it's the owner.
Yeah, terrible. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. Why don't we move on, Jay? Another big thing we had to talk about here. Xavier Howard. So I'm a Dolphins fan. I love Xavier Howard. Superstar talent, dude. Superstar talent. And I think he deserves to be the highest paid cornerback in the NFL. I do. But guess what? He signed a contract. He did. And for those that aren't in the know, I mean, he's pulling one of these temper tantrums that he wants his contract restructured. He threatened to hold out. He ended up coming to camp because he faced a $50,000 per day fine if he didn't, which the NFL now implemented. But a couple years ago, he probably would have held out. Now he went on social media, demanded a trade. Everything I'm hearing now is that the Dolphins and Howard will work this out, and they will restructure the contract. So when we first talked about discussing this on the show, I think it was more of like my expectation was that they would move him. But I think it's leaning towards that he wants to be there, and I want him there. I know the Dolphins want him there, but it doesn't change my opinion. I'm just very disappointed in him. He signed a contract 2 years ago, $75.25 million, with $39.26 million of it guaranteed. Okay. A year later, the Dolphins signed cornerback Byron Jones, a free agent, to a 5-year deal for $82.5 million, so about $7 million more. And $54.375 was guaranteed. So $16 million more was guaranteed. Okay. Does Howard deserve a bigger contract? Is he a better player? Is he the number one corner on this team? Yes, he is. He had 10 interceptions last year. Byron Jones, I think, had 2. No question about it. But Howard signed his contract a year before the Dolphins signed Byron Jones. So that's the contract you signed, dude. And when you signed it, it was before you elevated you were already awesome, but you elevated yourself to like best corner in the game level. But you signed a contract before you did that. That's the way the apples fall off the tree sometimes. Now I know this is just the way the game is. This is how the NBA went. Players strong arm teams to play where they want to play. I'm just being unbiased as a Dolphin fan and just telling you I think Howard's wrong here, and I think it's not right. I'm admitting he deserves to be paid more than Byron Jones. But he signed the contract before he had that year and before they signed Byron Jones. The Dolphins didn't do anything wrong. Why is Xavier Howard going in the media and say he feels the Dolphins aren't respecting him? How? They signed you to a very lucrative contract at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that it's an epidemic in sports. I don't think it's just an NFL issue. I mean, you hit on with the NBA. I think players today, it's almost like, they feel like they have to fight for whatever they can fight for, because if they don't, who else is going to? Nobody's going to fight for them. Because when it comes to, like, let's face it, both sides are greedy. I mean, you think ownership isn't greedy? I mean, ownership's just as greedy as players. But the bottom line is, yes, there has to be a kind of happy medium. And with this guy, he signed a contract. And honestly, it's kind of the same thing. Yeah, I don't want to say it's the same thing, but you had a similar situation with Aaron Rodgers wanting out, because he wouldn't get a pay raise when he's already making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And I just believe that these players, there's kind of already been a choreographed script that they follow, and they know, okay, if I want out of said team, I'm just going to ask for more money.
You nailed it. They obviously they have to have the talent to be able to do that. So
correct.
They do that. You don't have the talent, you can't pull that game. But
right.
So we're acknowledging that they're talented players, and in some cases maybe they do deserve more than they get. But they signed a contract. Nobody put a gun to your head and say sign this contract. And it's not like you're living impoverished, getting $39 million of guaranteed money. Okay, and more than likely he's going to get the full value of the deal. Well, now, hold on. While I'm on it, that's not to say that I would be against Xavier Howard privately going to the Dolphins and seeing about restructuring the deal. If it didn't work out, it doesn't work out. My problem is going public and demanding a trade. I think if he had just not done that, maybe it would have worked out. And I think they're still going to come to a deal. I get what he's doing. Maybe it's just calling a bluff because he thinks it'll put pressure on the Dolphins. I just am saying it's not right. And sometimes we've seen in these circumstances, it does lead to a trade.
Well, you hit it on the head, because the Eagles restructure contracts all the time. I mean, they just restructured Lane Johnson and I believe maybe it was Barnett. They restructured 2 contracts. They do it all the time. So do all teams, not just the Eagles. So you're right. I think the fact that he went public about it is what we have an issue with.
Yeah.
Had he went to just management and said, guys, I really think I need a restructure, who knows? They might have just said yes.
And even if they didn't, maybe in due time they would have. But Rome wasn't built in a day. Just because somebody says no the first time doesn't mean you throw a temper tantrum like you're 5 years old. Like, social media is like a cancer. And then let's just say they come to an agreement, whatever. Come on, man. What kind of teammate does it make you when you're saying this? You're basically throwing your teammate under the bus. And to Byron Jones's credit, he's been nothing but gracious in saying, Xavier Howard, I have no problem with him. He deserves it. Credit to Byron Jones. Because I'm sure he knows he's an inferior corner, but it doesn't make it okay for Xavier Howard to say this stuff in the media. And Byron Jones, by all means, would have every right to be pissed off that his teammate would do that. Like, I can't imagine, like, Pete Alonso bad-mouthing Dominic Smith on the Mets. They both play first base, and one has to play and one has to switch position, whatever. I can't imagine it. Because Pete Alonso and Dominic Smith both seem like great teammates. And you don't see it as much in Major League Baseball, to be honest. It's an NFL, NBA thing. You don't hear about it in hockey too much either. It's just it's terrible. I don't like it, but that's my 2 cents. I hope they sign him.
Well, like I said,
I hope they restructure the deal and it works out. Sorry, what's that, Jay?
No, I said it's an epidemic. It's happening, far too often.
Yep.
I mean, before the whole Deshaun Watson, news came out, he wanted out. You know what I mean? Like, so it's every player. It's like, if a player's unhappy, they just know, like, okay, I'll ask for more money because then I know that there's a 90% chance that they're not going to give me the money that I'm asking for. And then I'm going to say, well, I demand a trade.
That's so it's basically
like I said, they choreographed the script. I mean, it's basically a template. And they
That's
just
what we're doing again. We're beating another dead horse.
Just like Guns N' Roses, baby.
No, I'm serious. We're beating a dead horse again.
Sometimes you feel like beating
we can talk about this every week, Anyway, dude, I think it's about that time. They need to live up to the contract they signed. Thank you, Mom. Thank you.
Mom's checking in. Hey, Dottie. And Don, thank you for checking in, too. Appreciate you, brother.
Anyway, why don't we get to the segment we haven't done in a couple weeks, the picks of the week. Who's going first? Who do you want to go first, Jay?
Well, you know what? I'm going to go quick because
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to go first, and mine.
You always make me go first.
Exactly. I always make you go first. I'm going to go first.
That's it.
And I'm going to be short and sweet because my pick of the week is actually an under the radar album that a lot of people aren't talking about, but they should be. And it was from Smith and Kotzen, and the album is called Smith and Kotzen.
Yes, and we're talking about Adrian Smith
from Iron Maiden. Adrian Smith, which
and Richie Kotzen.
That's why I wore my Iron Maiden shirt, and I figured maybe Aaron will know who I'm going to play, but I wasn't picking the Iron Maiden new album that's not out yet.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, someone else checked in. Uh-oh.
I was talking about Xavier Howard.
Yeah. So anyway, my pick of the week is Smith and Kotzen. It's basically Adrian Smith and Richie Kotzen. Adrian Smith from Iron Maiden, Richie Kotzen from Winery Dogs, and a couple other bands. This album is absolutely phenomenal. It was released actually in March, so it's pretty recent. It was a couple months back. And basically, these two guys, Adrian Smith and Richie Kotzen, have wrote the whole album and played every instrument on the album. So between Richie and Adrian, they play the bass, they sing, and they play guitar. And then they have a couple drummers that sat in. I believe Nico McBrain is on one of the tracks, and Richie Kotzen actually plays drums on five of the tracks. So basically, it's these two guys, awesome musicians, and they made an awesome album. Now, this isn't up my alley because Aaron will tell you I'm the heavy guy, but this is more of like a blues type, Southern type, rock type album. But I love it. Every song on the album is good, and my favorite track on the album is "Taking My Chances." But it also and the track "Scars," which is it's kind of like a ballady anthem. So if you haven't checked it out, it's available on all streaming platforms, Amazon, where you can go on iTunes.
Or God forbid you go buy the actual
or buy the album. Correct.
Physical product.
But that's my pick of the week. Smith and Kotzen, like I said, short and sweet. Aaron, what you got?
All right, so my pick of the week is Aaron Jones, spelled A-Y-R-O-N, not like A-A-R-O-N like me, but Aaron Jones. The album is Child of the State. Dude, I've been listening to this guy a lot lately. He's from Seattle, Washington. He actually had a band in Seattle. It was called Aaron Jones and the Way, and they used to play in like bars and the local scene over there. And you're not going to believe he was discovered by the rapper Sir Mix-a-Lot, who's also a producer. So he was discovered by Sir Mix-a-Lot. But dude, I mean, he's an amazing singer, songwriter, guitar player. He described his sound one time as Michael Jackson if he played guitar in Nirvana's band. That's an exact quote from Aaron Jones. So, I mean, you could kind of get an idea what the music is. It's definitely, I don't know if I'd call it metal. It's hard rock with a real bluesy, soulful edge to it. The big single that's out right now from the record is called Take Me Away. There is a video for that. Check it out. And my personal favorite track on the record is called My Love Remains. It is an unbelievable ballad. And I mean, it's an amazing, amazing song. It's like Jimi Hendrix, Little Wing with a modern edge to it. I don't know. It's an amazing, amazing track. My Love Remains. So short and sweet, man. My pick of the week is Aaron Jones, Child of the State. Definitely check it out. So that's my pick of the week.
I checked it out.
Yes, you did.
3 times and I finally did.
Yep. Kick ass, right?
I love it.
Yep. Awesome. Anyway, dude, I was happy to be back this week. As always, another great show. And we hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope Guns N' Roses is kicking everybody's ass tonight at MetLife Stadium. While we can enjoy the live music before everything gets shut back down. Not looking forward to that, but it seems like it's headed that way. So anyway, dude, great show.
Thanks to everybody for checking in too.
Yeah. Oh, as always. And don't forget, check us out at www.sportsandmetal.com and on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram at Sports and Metal. Until next time, rock on.
Peace out.
And that's our show. Tune in next time for more Sports and Metal with Jason Voorhees and Aaron Savage. Ooh, yeah! Got something to say? Hit us up at sportsandmetal0423 at yahoo.com or on Twitter at sportsandmetal.